thank you to Istanbul for hosting us and welcoming us to your magnificent city. Yes, I'm chair, but as of last night, it was a very late night meeting, and I was very proudly elected as chair of World Urban Parks. So I'm going to talk today about well-being and the critical role of parks in the well-being and the health of our communities. I apologise, I've just got to put a timer on so I don't get in trouble with Kevin. Now, well-being is an interesting thing, but communities around the world are now asking governments and community, their councils to develop better parks, develop better green spaces, improve our health and well-being, develop policies at government levels, at high levels, to improve well-being. And of course, we're seeing that now. There's a lot of global trends and conferences developing. We just held the Future Green Cities conference in Utrecht, which was fantastic. And universities around the world are working on research as to how green space improves our health and our well-being. And of course the World Health Organization is doing a great deal of work in that space as well. And we need to do what we can to reduce the exposure of our communities to non-communicable diseases like diabetes and things that we can actually improve lifestyle and therefore improve our health and our mental health. So it's been a global trend, not just recent. It's been a change in governments around the world. And some governments like New Zealand is one of the strong ones in my mind, the policies that they have. And only recently from an Australian point of view, our government has just started to focus on well-being in their policy and not focus on GDP as the definition of how good the country is going. So, but what is well-being? Well-being could mean a lot of things. We need physical well-being, we need spiritual well-being, we need mental well-being, we need emotional, social, and this can mean different things to every one of us. So for a person my age, physical well-being, if I can climb up those stairs and talk to you, I'm pretty happy. But to a young person, maybe they need to run a marathon or so forth. Emotional, psychological well-being is how are you feeling mentally every day? It's the stresses of life getting to you too much, and I tell you, it gets harder and harder. And, some of my slides is not complete. Spiritual well-being should have been up there, and spiritual well-being maybe to somebody is religion, but maybe to someone else it's the connection to country. In Australia, where we have the Indigenous community, their connection to the land, connection to nature is their spiritual well-being. And we need to look at getting a balance. As I say, it means something different to all of us, and we as parks professionals, designers, we need to keep those things in mind when we're designing our spaces. So fundamentally, well-being is about having a fulfilled life, people enjoying going about their business, having a healthy lifestyle and having healthy in themselves, and a good, healthy community and a place to live. So we as a people, as a species, we have evolved in nature. We've only, in recent terms, and I would normally say the last centuries, but I guess here in some parts of Europe, maybe it's millennium, that we've lived in cities. But we've never had cities with 20 million people. That's only a very recent thing. The stresses of life that we're experiencing out there is taking its toll. And, some people may love the lights, the hustle, the bustle, but as a species, we've only evolved, and we need to have connection with nature and connection with green spaces. And we need, to look at the air, the noise. I do not know how people sleep in Istanbul, sorry. I come from a farm outside of the city in Australia, and it's silent of a night, but Istanbul is a very noisy city. So the other thing, of course, is air, the air pollution. And a lot of European cities, I've been travelling for 2 months around Europe, and a lot of European cities, you can see the air, and that's a concern. As I've said, we've evolved over time and within nature, but we've moved into the cities. There's a bit of a statistic. I don't know if you know that by 2050, about 75% of the world's population will live in cities, in urban spaces. And that's back in 2009. It used to be 50-50. 50% in urban areas or 50% in rural areas. And if you've only got to go outside of Istanbul into the rural areas of Turkey here, and you can see that people are leaving the land and moving into the urban areas. And that's the same right across the globe. It's not unique to this country. And so we need to look at making sure we have the green space that's in the city, we have the nature in the city. We're living a more sedentary lifestyle. We don't... we drive our car everywhere, or we jump on the metro or whatever like that. Whereas we used to have to walk. We used to have to do it the hard way. We need to find a balance in our cities. So this is an example of, we all know, anecdotally, we all know, a nice green leafy suburb is a nice place to live. So on this side you can see a green leafy suburb. This is in the city where I work, in Queanbeyan in Australia. And the other one is in Sydney. And, there's not a tree in sight on that second one. And where would you rather be? You would rather be in that green, leafy suburb. It increases good street trees could potentially increase your business. 30% reduction in air conditioning and cost of living. These are all important things which, again, go back to your health and your well-being. Went too far. Now, this is a quick example of what I looked at this one in Australia. This is a snapshot of 2 suburbs in Australia. They're both exactly the same size. They're both... top one has 60 houses. In the exact same space, the bottom one has 90 houses. I stopped counting at about 150 trees on the top one. I can only count 10 trees on the bottom one. This one's in North Sydney, a very expensive suburb, a very affluent suburb. The one on the bottom is in Western Sydney, where most people are having to live nowadays, out in the suburbs. Now, you could say, well, Tim, that's a well-established residential area. They've had time to grow those trees. But I defy anyone to find a space to plant a tree in this suburb down the bottom. And that heat island is going to be horrific. And as we get climate change, they're going to find it incredibly hard to do anything to improve that neighbourhood. And what will probably happen is all the people wanting to live into the affluent suburb, they'll put houses in their backyards and those trees will disappear over time. So we need to change the policies of government to stop that from happening. We need to really focus on ensuring there's enough green space. One of the best policies I heard was from the city of Singapore. Singapore prides itself being as a city in a garden, and it's a magnificent city if you get an opportunity to visit it. They have a policy that says to a developer, if you reduce the footprint of your dwellings, your buildings, and turn that into green space, we'll allow you to go a couple floors higher. So they have a height limit, but you can go a little higher if you turn over the footprint back to green space and make it publicly available. And of course, people take that up because higher apartments cost more money. And as a result, you can walk anywhere in Singapore and there's green space. And it's a very, very livable city. But as they always say, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. So the science. Across the globe, as I've said, we've got scientists working diligently on research projects. I've got just a couple of examples. There are thousands of examples out there. The University of Wollongong in Australia has a group of scientists called Power Lab. They network between universities. And they've come up with some research that says if you increase the tree canopy by around 30%, then you can reduce the risk of diabetes by 31%. Oh, sorry, it should be 3%, not 31%. There's a typo there. And if 3% doesn't sound a lot, but if you're part of that 3%, it could mean a great deal. If you increase the canopy by greater than 30%, you can reduce the risk of heart disease by 22%. Now that's because, as I said earlier, green suburbs are more relaxing, more affluent, more comfortable suburbs to live in. So you live a better, healthier lifestyle, and that's where the benefits come from. We're seeing research in universities in Ireland. They're mapping the relationship between green and blue space and community health. The universities in Germany, in partnership with the World Health Organization, are doing some research into air pollution and reducing air pollution and its impacts on type 2 diabetes. They're also doing a great deal of work on what is the best tree species to plant to extract particles out of the atmosphere. And so that's something, as horticulturalists, as landscapers, you know, if we could plant trees that remove pollutants from the air, then that's a positive thing for everybody. And again, I mentioned the World Health Organization. So they did a metadata analysis. What they did is they brought together 11,000 research papers from around the world in working on green and blue space and health and well-being. And they analysed it, and they can confirm across those 11,000 papers, there's overwhelming proof that that time spent in green space can improve your health and your well-being. Dr. Pierre Moudou and Aunt Dina, they're ones working on the use of trees and removal of particles in airspace. They have a program called Green UR. I don't know if it's been launched yet, but World Urban Parks has been worked with them to trial it in 7 cities in Mexico, I think it was, and gather the data. And what that does is it looks at the known data about heart disease, diabetes and so forth like that, all the medical results that are known, and then it looks at the mapping of your city and looks at the green and the blue spaces, your tree canopy, and then it looks at where your industrial areas are and your schools and your primaries and your residential areas. And then if they increase the canopy or move a bit of landscape to a particular area, they come back with a changed mortality rate. So instead of saying, oh, your property is going to go up in value, it comes back and tells you less people will die of heart disease, less people will die. And it'll give you real data on how you could improve people's lives by using this program. So keep a watch out. The World Health Organization, the office in Bonn, Germany, is doing some fantastic work there. And I talked about air pollution, and the World Health Organization sees that air pollution is one of the most lethal things we have. The ambient air pollution kills more than 4 million people prematurely every year. And in Australia, just a local statistics, everybody may have heard, in 2019 we had horrific bushfires up the entire east coast of Australia. And at that time, the smoke and the dust that ended up in Canberra, our national capital, killed 400 people. 400 people died that year directly related to the smoke and the dust from those bushfires. Not by the bushfire, but the side effects of the bushfire. And that's Canberra only has a population of 450,000 people. So that's a pretty high statistic if you take it against a much larger city. Istanbul's unofficially 25 million. So urban parks and green spaces are more than just, well, urban parks are more than just green spaces. They're critical infrastructure. And that's what we need to, as practitioners, we need to convince everybody, our governments, our mayors, our communities, that parks need to be recognised as critical infrastructure central to building a healthy city. I'll come back to this project in a minute, and just I'm actually ahead of schedule, Kevin. So what can we do? What can we as people working in the industry do? So we can design accessible green spaces. So we need to make sure our green spaces are for everybody, not just for the rich, not just for the affluent. They have to be for everybody. Everybody needs to be able to access green spaces. Another statistic, and it was mentioned in my bio, I'd done a lot of work on advocating for older adults in parks, and that's because I've got grey hair. How many people, and you don't have to put your hand up, just think to yourself, how many people in this room are over 35 years old? Okay. Yep, you don't have to put your hand up, but you know who you are. The World Health Organization and the World Bank have predict that by 2050 we will have 2 billion people on this earth over the age of 60. And if you're over 35, you're one of those 2 billion people. And if you're lucky enough to be younger than one of those people, think about your parents and your grandparents. So when you're designing a public space, or when you're building a landscape or maintaining a park, think of the older people, think of the people who have accessibility challenges, because we need parks to be for everybody. To an older adult, a trip fall can be the most life-changing thing that happens to them. So if you have, my own grandmother, a number of years back, rolled out of bed and broke her hip. Now, not necessarily to someone here, that's not life-changing, but it was the end of her life. She never came out of hospital from a broken hip. So a trip in a park could mean life-changing. That person may end up in a care, or maybe they're too scared to go back to the park ever again. We can provide green areas for exercise. We can provide quiet spaces for meditation, for prayer, for comfort, just to relax. Green spaces to take time to rejuvenate. We can also, and this is another critical thing, bring nature, bring biodiversity back into the city. So the cities are growing out and pushing nature away. We need to bring it back into our cities. And of course, we need to advocate. That's the most important role for us, is to talk about this, encourage all levels and educate people. So, good design, accessible design. I'm going to get this pointer to work here. All right, I'll point. The park bench you can see there, clearly designed by a landscape architect who thought, that's a pretty sexy design, I like that. But from an accessibility point of view, yes, you can get to it, but if you have any kind of challenges in sitting down, standing up, that's going to be a hard seat to sit on. It's also no green. It's going to be such a hot landscape. So on a good sunny day, not many people are going to want to go and sit on that one. A very simple park insert or a seat insert changes that to an accessible seat, but it still looks good, and behind it are trees that will eventually grow and give shade and make that a much more desirable landscape. So we have to always think about who are the end users and the long term, not what it looks like the day we finish the job and hand it over. The two photos down the bottom are just simple designs. The first one looks great. It's got lots of green, lots of trees, but again, trip hazard to an older adult or anybody. The other one's maybe not quite as sexy. It could be changed a little bit, but it's got a clear path for walking and accessibility. But it brings green, people can begin green. This photo up the top here, I actually love this photo. As landscape architects, everyone knows about desire lines. We're pretty lazy, we want to walk from A to B. We're not going to go via C, we're going to cut through the middle. That desire, that's a park in Wrocław in Poland. I only took that about 3 weeks ago. It's at the university. And the two desire lines in that park lead to the centre of the park, to those two trees. They don't go anywhere else. They go to the trees and back out again. And that's showing to me that in summer in Rocklow, those 2 trees, and they're the only 2 trees in that park, are so important. It was at the University of Rocklow, so it was obviously the students gathering there. And that, unfortunately, will probably be the death of those trees because of them gathering there. So a really simple bit of decking underneath could solve that problem. There's another photo which I really love. It's one of my favourite photos. I took that in Vienna about a week ago. And they're doing that in the centre of the city, where they're putting a tree for the future shade. They're putting an accessible and easy to use seat for older adults, and it will not impact the root zone of that tree. And they're the little things we have to think of as designers and builders of parks. Provide green spaces for people to walk and exercise, jog, cycle, etc. There's nothing worse than jogging on the side of a busy road or a hot footpath. Look how many people are walking around that park there. That's a park in the city where I manage. That number of people never changes all day. There's people going around that park, walking, sitting, enjoying that park. I must admit, it's a magnificent park. Not my doing, it's a heritage park. I inherited it and I manage it. But we also need to create little quiet spots. Just could be a corner of a garden, somewhere quiet where you can sit and enjoy and maybe meditate and just recuperate. We need to bring nature into the cities. Now, this is probably easier to do than we realise. So, whether it be along waterways, we need to have a buffer on the waterways. Don't build right to the edge of the water. Have a bit of a buffer. This particular park down in the corner was originally designed to have the path right on the edge of the water. And our local community said, well, no, where are the ducks going to go? Where are the water dragons, the lizards we get in Australia, going? So we pull the path back into the garden. We have a soft edge on the river, and it is a very desirable park now. And I've got more to talk about that. And yes, we come up to the edge, but we can still have the black swans and so forth. Bioretention ponds. We have to have stormwater management, and I'm sure there's people talking about that later on. But let's make them as natural as possible to bring the wildlife into our city. I was really pleased to do the tour at the Ataturk Park up yesterday with the municipality. That's bringing nature right into the heart of the city, and that's fantastic. We're doing a good job there. The one up the top there, that's so trying to get kids involved with nature, and that's in, it's not Utrecht, I can't, it's a small city near Utrecht, and they removed the grass and the hard surfaces around the playground, and they rewilded the playground. And they encourage the kids to get into that garden, pick flowers, see the insects, and become connected with nature. And the more we can get our kids involved, then the next generation's got a much better chance. All right, advocate and educate. And this is probably, in my mind, the most important thing we need to do. I'm here talking to professionals. I'm here talking to the converted, I guess. But really, we need to be talking to our communities. We need to educate our communities on the importance of these things. So in Queanbeyan, what we did was we did a heat mapping exercise. Everyone can access this technology nowadays with the satellites. You can look at the heat of your city. Where are the hot spots? Where are the cool spots? And then you can develop a policy that helps you or helps the community understand what are the spots you're going to work on. Where are you going to increase the urban forest or increase the parkland to reduce that heat? And it may not be beneficial to target the hotter spots. It may be better off targeting the warm spots and expanding out the cooler areas, and then you get the edge effect, which then reduces the hot spots. So go where you can get the best result. Get the community involved. So this is a small group again in Queanbeyan, where the community developed a group called the Queanbeyan Microforest Group. And so they did a fundraising exercise, a GoFundMe thing. They raised 30,000 Australian dollars in about a month, which surprised us all. But that's how important people see greening their city is. And they use professional designers and they use professional landscapers to do the hard work, and then they got the community in to do all the planting, the mulching and the soft work, the easy stuff. And the community now own it and they maintain it. So it's one of my parks, but I give it to that group to look after it, and they go in every couple of weeks and they water the trees and they weed the gardens and they keep it alive. And they have a bit of a community barbecue, and they connect with their neighbours as well. So it's about that social connection as well. The other thing, which is, I saw these two bottom ones are in Canada, in Edmonton, Canada, where it's doing some great work along the river. But also what they're doing is educating, simple signs that say, did you know these trees we've planted are going to remove this much carbon from the atmosphere throughout their lifetime? And of course everyone's going to see that and get an understanding how important these trees really are. All right, some projects that I have worked on. These are my parks, urban landscape projects in Queanbeyan. So we had very fortunate, and I think Istanbul, it appears you have a mayor that is parks oriented, because I believe they're closing streets in the old section and taking cars out and turning it back to people. I've seen the great work you're doing in the parks. So we had up until recently, we had a mayor who was parks focused. Our current mayor is sports fields focused, so it's still okay. But this is a street in Queanbeyan where we had a large shopping centre. We had 12-metre wide roads, and of course the park on the opposite side was taken over by cars. And there was getting less and less space for the people, and that's the Queanbeyan River, which is a very important watercourse that goes through our city. And what the mayor said is he wanted to reclaim the park for the people, reduce the speed of the traffic on that road, and screen out that ugly building on the back there, because that's the back of a very large shopping centre. So our brief was pretty simple, and what we did was we narrowed the street down to only 6.5 metres wide. We've got half the amount of parking, or quarter of the amount of parking. Underneath that building is a giant car park, and across the road is another giant car park, so they didn't need it there. So we returned that park to the people, and we connected it back down to the river. And what that means today is we have festivals there of a night. Every year we have the Canberra Symphony Orchestra that performs there. We have both dry and wet play. In Australia we put shade sails over our playgrounds because of the heat. But there is also a lot of trees planted around that. And my theory is that when the trees are mature enough and those shade sails need to be renewed, I won't need to renew the shade sails. I'll let the trees take over. But you can see from what was a fairly ugly car park, we've now got a great deal of community involvement in the park. The shelter there, I only added that one in because it was something we tried as a bit of an experiment, and we've started to roll it out in other parks. The entire roof of that shelter is solar panels, and those solar panels run those barbecues underneath. So you can go and have a barbecue there, and you're using the sun to cook your dinner. This is another one in the same city, next street over. This was probably the ugliest street in our CBD. It was dedicated to cars. I think there's 4 lanes of traffic, 2 are parking, plus some turning lanes. Some fairly ugly businesses that actually turned their back to the streets and faced the car park on the other side. And the mayor's brief to us there was he wanted it to be pedestrian friendly, because you can't cross the street, you're only in these couple of little spots, and then you've got to cross 4 lanes of traffic. He wanted it to be green, and he wanted it to be suitable for dining, for eating out. He wanted to change that street to a lifestyle street. So that was a good brief for us. We narrowed it down to only 2 lanes of traffic. We kept the parking because there were businesses that relied on it. But we tree-lined the entire street. We were able to recycle some mature trees we brought in, which was helped us speed up the growth. We planted a lot of gardens, and we now have 11-metre wide footpaths, and they're perfect for dining, and that is one of the busiest streets now in the city. And I can tell you, the change, if I said to anyone I was going to change that street, I'd probably be hunted out of town. This is a smaller project. This was a small park, again in Queanbeyan, on the other side of the river from the others. It was fairly bare. We had trees, we had some substance, but it was fairly bare. And there's a little art gallery down the bottom corner and not much else in the park. And so people would jog through, but that was it. And the brief there was that they wanted a cafe for the park and for the art gallery, and they wanted it to be a sensory park for children. So somewhere where children can go and use all their senses, their sight, their smell, their hearing and so forth, touch. And what we did was, and it's only a small park, the engineers immediately said, and the planners said to us, I couldn't have a cafe there, it's a flood area. So the river floods, and I went, well, I don't take no as a suitable answer. I need genuine reasons. That art gallery hasn't washed away in any floods. So we put the cafe next to the art gallery, but just to keep the engineers happy, you can see it's a shipping container. It's a couple of shipping containers together. If there's a flood, I'll put them on the back of a truck, take them away, bring them back later. Not a problem. And we engineered the pergola so that it can withstand floods. This is about being a resilient and green community. It's an extremely popular Mexican restaurant of all things, and you really have to wait to get in there now, it's so popular. But the gardens, you can see, the kids love it. All the plants have some form of sensory, and it is literally one complete garden. So all that green space that you can see is garden now, and it's always busy, always busy. A great part of the city. Now, this is not my project, but I have to talk about it because to me it's one of the best things that happened in Sydney. So if anyone knows Sydney, this is an area called Barangaroo. So the iconic images of Sydney, around the corner from this, but sort of behind my head there is the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. So you stand at the Opera House, you look at the Harbour Bridge, and this park is around the corner from there. This was the international shipping terminal for Sydney. And up until about 2010, I think it was about might have been just before then, the government moved the shipping terminal to another port further south, out of the city, out of Sydney, and then went, well, this is community land. It was leased to the port, but it doesn't belong to the port, it belongs to the community. What are we going to do with it? And we were very lucky, a former Prime Minister of Australia convinced them to turn it into a park. And so a very prominent architect was engaged, and the brief was to try to take it back to what it once looked like before it was converted into a shipping terminal. And you can see the landmarks, the blocks of units, the things that are fixed and so forth. So that what we're talking about is that big slab of concrete over the water there. And before, it used to be a headland, and we were lucky enough we had paintings that were done in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, that what it used to look like, what Sydney Harbour used to look like. And then they went out and they photographed headlands all around Sydney Harbour, and they replicated it. So first they did was to cut away the concrete, and then they brought in, or they actually dug it out of the site, they dug out large chunks of sandstone, and they rebuilt the headland back up. So that's flat on, whereas that is flat on the bottom and then it transitions up a wall. This is actually flat on top and then grades back down to the river, back down to the harbour. And underneath that, the cavern that they created by cutting out that sandstone is a giant art gallery underneath that park. So they were able to return a huge piece of industrial land back to the community of Sydney, and it's an extremely popular park, and it's been used every weekend. So, as I said, as I'm coming to the end of my talk, parks and green spaces, they're for everybody, and we need to make them for everybody day and night. So not just during business hours. It has to be any time, whether it's for exercise, whether it's for events, whether it's just for markets or for relaxation. And it's critical infrastructure. And this is a challenge I'm going to give each of you when you leave here. So it's time to get in touch with nature. So there's a global program that started in Australia. It's called Nature Pact. And how that works is every September, the People and Parks Foundation in Melbourne runs this program right around the world. Different cities join it. And you put the challenge out to your community to get in connection with parks. Now, September's just gone, so I'm going to say to you, you can do this any time of year. It doesn't have to be September, but if you want to do it as a city, go to that People for Parks Foundation in Melbourne and have a look. But the idea is you spend 20 to 30 minutes a day in a green space for about a period of a month. You can keep doing it longer. I do it for much longer now. Whether it be your favourite park, your favourite garden, your forest, wherever. You just enjoy the atmosphere of that park. And if you don't feel refreshed, then you're probably spending too much thinking of outside the world. So free energy, recharge your batteries, free green energy. So, and that's there for you, Martin. I'm still wearing my beanie from Utrecht. Thank you, everybody. I finished a little bit early, Kevin, but that's all good. And thank you very much.